Let's get started. And I have just hit the record button. So hi and welcome everyone to Trauma Informed Begins With You, and It's Not What You Think. We'll have a presentation today by Kelly Lubeck, who I'm going to introduce right after I introduce myself. My name is Claire Luge, and I am the Executive Director of Prevent Child Abuse Arizona. We're a statewide nonprofit organization that is dedicated to strengthening families and protecting children. And along with Angie Burleson of the Arizona Adverse Childhood Experiences Consortium, we are hosting monthly webinars like this that focus on the trauma-informed approach and how to apply it to yourself, to others, to your professional life, and also just how to be a human being and apply the trauma-informed approach. These webinars are happening between our two signature events. So the Child Abuse Prevention Conference that Prevent Child Abuse Arizona puts on every year happened in July, and the Arizona Adverse Childhood Experiences Summit, their 8th annual one, I believe, is happening virtually December 14th through the 16th. So, shameless plug to sign up for that. It's going to be great. And so for the months between those two events that we're partnering on, we are hosting these monthly webinars just to keep the momentum going. So I'm glad to have you here. Angie is on today. You can see the AZA's Consortium box, but she's actually on vacation today. So she started the webinar, I'm hosting it. That's why she's not going to introduce herself, because she's not supposed to be working. So anyways, a couple of fun logistical reminders. If you have a question or have a comment, please share that in the chat box. I'll be monitoring that. And Kelly can take those questions periodically through the presentation, or she may choose to do so at the end, but I'll be keeping a tally of those things. And please direct your chat, your comment, your question to everyone. So you'll have to make that selection, because the default only makes it go to me and Kelly. And so to make sure everyone can see your comment and your question, please select to everyone. So now I'm going to introduce my friend and colleague, Kelly Lubeck, who is the presenter today at this webinar. And I'm going to read a bit of her bio because it is impressive. So Kelly Lubeck has spent years exploring how to blend her deep commitment to change making and serving the world with her passion for holistic healing and wellness. She has dedicated over 20 years to service-based work around the world, leading public health and early childhood programs, as well as coordinating systems building efforts to improve the health and quality of life for communities, good stuff, in Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, and many different places in the United States. Following her own journey over a decade ago through a healing crisis that left her wondering whether she'd even be alive to continue this work and to continue to be of service, she has been offering holistic healing and coaching services to individual clients, as well as facilitating workshops, courses, and healing retreats to groups locally and around the world. So we're very lucky here. In her programs, she weaves together her passion for service and dedication to health and healing. She helps conscious and committed change makers like you, leaders, healers, and caregivers return to their center, finding stillness, calm, healing, and connection so they can be well as they serve the world, because you know that you cannot be of service if you are not well. She loves to remind people that, and she loves to remind people that when those who care for the world, whatever that looks like, and that includes you, everyone on this call is a person who cares for the world. When you care for yourself, the world can heal and be well. And she has a lot of educational background, and she has learned a lot of things through many teachers, but she says that her finest teacher thus far is her 11-year-old son. So Kelly, take it away. About Trauma Informed Begins With You.
Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you, Claire and Angie and the ACEs Consortium and Prevent Child Abuse Arizona for having me here today. I'm really honored to be here and to get to talk with all of you about some topics that are some of the nearest and dearest to my heart. So welcome. I'm so delighted to be here, and I want to just take a moment to share some ideas about how to get the most out of today. So first, I want you to just notice your body. This is an interactive workshop with what I hope will be some new tools and ideas for you. So I want to invite you to, I'll be inviting you throughout to do a few different things, or to reflect, or to share in the chat. And I hope we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. And we're going to talk about the body quite a bit. So as we go, I want you to just notice what's coming up in your body as we move through the workshop, and ask you to keep a focus or some lens on your body as we go through. And as we discuss, just inviting you to notice what's happening in the body so you can walk away with a more embodied learning and with tools and ideas that you can use and share. In yoga, I don't know how many other yogis we have here, but we have this term called beginner's mind. And the concept is essentially, if you're hearing something for the first time, or if you're hearing something that you've heard before, or you already know, to take it in and listen to it as if it is the first time. And some of the things that you hear today might be familiar to you, and some of it might be old information, but I want to invite you to listen for something new in it, because I'm hoping that the combination of things today will spark something in you, and that you'll walk away with at least one thing that will serve you in your work, in your personal life, and with your family and your community. That is my hope. And a big part of what I teach is honoring the body and honoring the messages from the body. And so we won't go into this piece quite as much today, but learning to be responsive to the body in very simple and small ways, like, oh, I need to move, or I need a sip of water, or I need to stretch, or I want to lie down now, or I need to go to the bathroom. Those are all very simple ways that we build capacity to become more trauma informed and more resilient. And the more that we do it in small ways, the easier it is to do it in the bigger ways. So I want to encourage you to practice that today. And then finally, as so many of you know, because you are working in some really interesting times and with sometimes really hard things, tapping into these themes of self-care or being trauma informed and the nervous system and what healing is can tap you into ways that you might have been or maybe being self-neglecting, and that can be activating. And so if you find yourself in a place of feeling triggered or activated by something either that I share or something that you're guided to do, I want to encourage you to reach out to someone for support. I know that we have so many helpers and healers in this space today, and it's really important as the helpers and healers to be sure that you are getting what you need as well. So with that, I want to begin the workshop by diving right into this simple practice that can help your nervous system and also help bring us all together into this space energetically, and to support us being trauma informed in the ways that we're going to be discussing it today. So I want to invite you to go ahead and sit or stand, have your legs uncrossed, put both feet on the floor, your spine nice and long. And then just pause and notice the space you're in. Look around, see the shapes, doorways, windows, furniture, the space between you and other things. You're just paying attention to the space that you're in. And then if you're comfortable, go ahead and close your eyes and begin to notice your breath. You're just breathing normally. You're witnessing your breath, watching it come in through your nose, down your windpipe, filling your lungs. And then you watch the breath leave the body, exiting the lungs, the windpipe, and out your nose or mouth. And just pay attention, a few breaths here, watching the breath come in and go out. And feel, as you notice your breath, feel what's underneath you. Feel the floor beneath your feet. Feel the chair or the couch that you're sitting on. Notice the sensation of these support structures meeting your body. So maybe you feel your back against something, or the backs of your legs against the seat, the floor underneath your feet. And feel how you're supported and held up by the seat and by the floor. And then notice that the chair is there to hold you and the floor is there to hold you and the chair. And they're just doing what they're supposed to do. And then I'd like you to think of a person or an animal, a two-legged or a four-legged, that make you feel safe, and supported at home in your body. And I'd like you to imagine that you're with them. And you're with them in a place that feels safe to you. So feeling your breath as you feel into the space of safety and comfort. And let yourself just lean into that for a few seconds. And then notice your body. Has anything shifted in how your body feels as you feel yourself in this place of safety with a being, two-legged or four-legged being that makes you feel safe and secure? And then just bringing your awareness to the fact that you've come to a workshop focused on how being trauma-informed begins with you. And I want you to hear the words trauma-informed and ask yourself, what do they mean? What are the definitions that you've heard or that you use? And then just ask, and this doesn't have to make sense in your brain. I want you to just check in with your body. What does trauma-informed feel like in my body? And there's not a right or wrong answer here. You're just tapping in. What does trauma-informed feel like in my body? Notice if there's a place where it's located or if it's a general sensation. Notice any tightness or excitement or hope or fear, pinching, constriction, openness. You're just noticing, what does trauma-informed feel like in my body? And then come back to your breath, just noticing your breath entering and exiting the body. Big breath in through your nose, and then out through your mouth. Go ahead and gently open your eyes. And I want to invite you, if you'd like, to just share in the chat anything that you've noticed. We have a lot of material today, so I'm going to keep us moving, but I'd love you to share with each other in the chat anything you noticed that shifted or anything that you noticed about what trauma-informed feels like. And while you do that, I'm going to give you a roadmap of our time today. So we're going to begin with looking at definitions of being trauma-informed. We're going to look at the concept of building capacity. We're going to do some looking at nervous system basics, explore how trauma lives in the body. And then we're going to look at a new view on being trauma-informed and explore some tools and approaches to that. So go ahead and put in the chat. I know I asked you to chat just now. Oh yes, thanks, Claire. If you're needing to chat, go ahead and put to everyone instead of to this, just to the speakers. So what does trauma-informed mean anyway? We have lots of definitions. Lots of us throw this term around. We're working with some in some form or another with families, with ACEs, with vulnerable children or families. And I'm just going to put up a couple of pages of what trauma-informed means or what I've seen in the literature. So I just wanted to look at these definitions before getting started and moving into more of the content, because I think it's important to ground ourselves in this and also explore what's here. So I'm going to read just a little bit of this. Trauma-informed care acknowledges the need to understand a patient's life perspective or experiences in order to deliver effective care. It has the potential to improve patient engagement, treatment adherence. It's also, the next bullet, a set of organizational competencies and core clinical guidelines. Questions remain for the field: how to conceptualize trauma and how to develop payment strategies to support this approach. That was one institution's trauma-informed definition. Here's another. Trauma-informed care shifts the focus from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. I know I've used this one a lot. I know this is something that we talk about in the ACEs training of trainers. And here they speak of how a trauma-informed approach to care acknowledges that healthcare organizations and care teams need to have a complete picture of a patient's life situation, past and present, in order to provide effective healthcare services with a healing orientation. Adopting trauma-informed practices can potentially improve patient engagement, treatment adherence, health outcomes, etc. So this is great. We have these conversations happening around the country, around the world, around what being trauma informed is, and it's being built in. We have federal agency that works on this with lots of training happening, and it's so essential for the people we serve. And in being trauma informed, to speak to Nadine Burke-Harris's quote that I heard her say one time, we become this cavalry. We, become those who serve when we understand and are trauma informed. But what's missing from this definition? And I'm curious if any of you are noting any pieces there, and what's sort of missing in the definition of trauma informed as we've seen it. So feel free to share in the chat. Our personal self-regulation, thanks, recognizing your own traumas, great. Self-care, yes. So we are missing the piece in here about being trauma informed for ourselves. And the other piece that's really striking to me about actually how to do it. Yes, Claire. What's really striking to me about these definitions is they are very cognitive and academic. They're very smart sounding. And they are located, when I hear the definitions, I feel them up in my brain. They feel very heady. But actually, they're a bit too far along in the pathway in the way that I see this healing journey, which I'm going to talk about. For us to be able to successfully implement trauma-informed care, because it is not actually a cognitive process to do it. We can locate the ideas in our brain, and it's fine to say and great to say that we should do these things, but we actually need to back up a little bit. So I wanted to just bring up some scenarios, and these are scenarios of a little more acute situations. But I wanted to share them because as I was reflecting and preparing for this workshop, I was thinking on how do we depict this in real life ways? And we've all had the experience, or I'm assuming all of us here have had the experience of being in a space where we are with someone, serving them, aiming to be trauma informed, whether we have that frame or not, but aiming to be of service in a way that is supportive and caring and loving. And something in us gets triggered. So I want to just talk to a couple of scenarios. One is a scene that I saw at my son's childcare when I picked him up many, many years ago. And the childcare provider had been hit in the back very hard by a 4-year-old, and the kid was angry and dysregulated. He was having a very hard time, and I knew he was having a hard time at home. And I arrived and she was shouting. She had exiled the child to the corner of the playground. She was in pain. She was holding her back. She was completely stirred up. Her sympathetic nervous system was very, very activated, and she was clearly in fight mode. And so I happen to know that this childcare provider had a history of domestic violence and had exited a marriage that had been abusive. And so when she got hit, this triggered a whole bunch of things in her. Now, does she know that she shouldn't exile children and send them to the corner of the playground and shout at them in front of all the other children? Probably. And could she manage that in that moment? No, because her sympathetic nervous system had completely hijacked her nervous system and her body and her brain, and she was in emergency mode. In her mind, she was experiencing an emergency, and her entire nervous system had activated to respond to that. So another situation is a healthcare provider in New York City. I actually heard this on a podcast months and months ago, but it was someone who was an EMT. And at the height of the pandemic, she was talking about her experience of the height of the pandemic, where she was, going night after night in the ambulance and doing all these runs to calls where people were dead on arrival or were dying as soon as they picked them up or as soon as they arrived. Really, really traumatic things happening on her watch every single night. And for her, her job had always been really stimulating and really wonderful, and not a big deal to experience these things because she was primed to be someone who was an good emergency responder. She had the system that was really good for this. And she really lived off of the adrenaline adrenaline rush of the emergency. And she was very good at doing the work, and also loved, stepping in and rescuing people and helping them, and being able to speak to their families after. But what she was speaking about in a very traumatized state following the emergency in New York was how, after months and months of these nonstop emergency runs and so much death and destruction on her watch, she was having panic attacks. She was in tears a lot of the time. She's not used to being one who spends time in tears. She was feeling both emotional shutdown and also feeling all of these intense emotions at the same time. She wasn't able to sleep, and she was kept going because she needed the job, and it was her identity. It was what she did, but she was always focused on keeping it together and shoving those emotions down as best she could. But is she currently, or was she at the time that I heard her interviewed, was she in the capacity to be trauma informed in her job? And when someone dies on her watch, is she with the capacity to be able to speak to the family and be with them in a trauma informed way when she's experiencing so much of her own traumatic situation? So do these care providers, and we could do a whole list of them, right? We could talk DCS, we could talk home visitation, we can talk about counseling. There's so many frontline people, or people who are serving families who experience this at one time or another. And of course, in the last 18 months, we know that it's been very much intensified. So do people know to be trauma informed? To some extent, it's intuitive, for many who are in caregiving professions. Do they have the training? Possibly, likely. Do they have the tools? Possibly. Do they have the mindset? Probably. But when we're in emergency situations, or when the system gets overstimulated, the most strong and regulated of care providers, whatever their care is, could have a really hard time acting in trauma-informed ways, even though they know the things and they have the mindset and they have the training. So what happens is that animal system takes over. That autonomic nervous system fires off with this, the sympathetic nervous system fires off, and the system's in fight or flight. It sounds the alarms, the body goes into emergency mode. And all the amazing stress hormones tell the body that there's an emergency. So they get flooded with adrenaline and cortisol, blood sugar rises, blood flow goes to the arms and legs. They feel ready for a fight or flight if needed. And the brain is focused on how to avoid the danger or how to meet it head on. And so in emergency mode, their prefrontal cortex, that part of our brains that reads the definitions, and that part is needed for them to be trauma informed. It doesn't work the way that they want it to, or we want it to. So I just want to briefly share a little bit about me and how I work. Claire mentioned some of the work that I do, and I just want to say a little bit more to lay the foundation for what I'm sharing today. So I spent close to 25 years, or I have spent 25 years doing service work in communities and public health, public service, working in very impoverished areas, both in the United States as well as in Latin America and Africa, and doing deep, deep, deep work of service. And through my own experience of doing emotionally intense work with an incredible passion for those I'm serving, I ended up on a path of burnout, of vicarious trauma, of unexplained illness, and nervous system dysregulation, which I did not know it was that at the time, but lots of unexplained things going on in my body. And this experience led me on this healing journey so that I could both heal myself, and ultimately this parallel path that I was taking led me to study this many different modalities so that I could also help others. And so since learning a variety of different modalities, including yoga and mindfulness, health coaching, nutrition, nervous system healing, trauma healing, shamanism, I learned more and more about how the body of evidence around these foundational tools is really grounded in how deeply they are of service. And there's a foundation in the science that speaks to how powerful these methods are. So I work with clients and I create programs and retreats that help people in their healing process. And in this, I want to say that many of them come with traumatic symptoms, and the symptoms can occur through ACEs for sure, but they also occur through war, through natural disasters, through exposure to violence in childhood or later in life. They occur through accidents and falls and serious illness, unexplained illness, loss of a loved one, surgical, medical, and dental procedures, difficult births, loss of birth, loss of pregnancy. It's not always ACEs. And so I just want to put all these different things into the mix, because I think so often we come into this work of supporting families and children with ACEs and hold ourselves a little distant from it, without realizing that our own experiences of any of this list and other things can also be trauma triggers. And so I worked with people who are out in the field doing humanitarian work, as well as doing frontline work in the US in privileged spaces. And in their nervous systems, many of these people look like war vets. And so much of my work weaves together this work of change making, leadership, and social service, and holistic wellness and nervous system healing. And so when I talk about trauma informed, I see it very holistically. It is not an academic exercise. I look at it with a very wide lens on what it is, and a wide lens on who it is we're talking about. Not just looking at those we're serving, but also those who are giving the care. And so my work is very much focused on helping people to heal and to build a greater capacity to be with themselves and with others as they serve. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of growing capacity. So I'm using this analogy of the river, which I really like, because if we look, this isn't a great picture of a river because it's very full of rocks. But I want to use this analogy for a foundation of what we're talking about today. So I'd like you to imagine that a river represents your nervous system in your body, and the rocks in the river represent the traumas or triggers, survival stress, excess responsibility, all the things that you've always been holding, and then add to it the last 18 months of what you've been holding and all the ways that you do things to heal and to help others. And then close your eyes and just for a moment, imagine your nervous system in your body as river. And then go ahead and put the stressors and the traumas and triggers in rock form in your river. And I just want you to notice, what does the flow look like in your river? So just take a few breaths to pay attention to that. And notice what happens to the flow of your river when there are more rocks. And if you'd like to open your eyes, you're welcome to share in the chat if you'd like, or you can just hold this close to your heart. But ideally here, what we want is to have a healthily flowing river. So we think of the flow in the river as the resilience, as self-care practices, as a healthy nervous system, and essentially as our capacity to meet what's in front of us. So we so often think of our service work as what we need to go out and do. We want to make sure that we have the capacity within our nervous systems, within our bodies, to be able to go out and meet those that we care for in a way that supports them in trauma-informed ways. And so I like to, again, using the river analogy, think of different ways that we can increase the flow or increase the capacity. So we can do one of two things. We can widen or deepen the river by growing our capacity and doing different things that strengthen resilience and our capacity, or we can remove the rocks, some of those excess rocks. And we do this by both removing things from our plates. So if our plates are too full, it can be helpful to remove the rocks, but also through doing deeper healing of traumas and triggers. And so in our time together today, we're going to look a bit at both of these, but primarily focus on widening and deepening the river, and then just touching into the deeper healing pieces, which are those pieces of removing the big rocks, especially the ones that kind of get lodged in. So I mentioned here that I do have an exercise for this free on my website where there's more space and time to go into it. It's a little more extensive. So you're welcome to go there and sign up, and it will be sent to you. And so now we're going to move on and just talk very, very briefly about the basics of the nervous system so that we know that we're talking about the same thing. So the parts of our nervous system: central nervous system, which are the brain and the spinal cord, and then our autonomic nervous system, which is the peripheral system, everything that expands out from the brain and the spinal cord. So when we look at our autonomic nervous system, which is where we're focusing today, all of the reference to nervous system is here. This part of the nervous system is responsible for all the automatic things: our breathing, our digestion, repair of tissues if there's an injury, our heart rate, our hormone release. It's also responsible for fight or flight. And of course, we hear about this lots in the ACEs work, right? So knowing that fight or flight response. We hear a little less about the freeze or immobility response, but that also is a responsibility of the autonomic nervous system. And then the last piece, which we really don't hear about much, is the social engagement, love, and connection piece. And this piece is essential because we are not built for constant survival. We are built to have the flow in our river going between these different parts. We need to be able to flow between the fight or flight, the freeze, and the social engagement, love, and connection, which is where we want to be most of the time. So the autonomic nervous system then breaks down into two branches: our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the slowing down, and the sympathetic nervous system, which is the accelerating. So the sympathetic nervous system, my sympathetic nervous system is a little activated right now because I'm presenting and I want to make sure that I'm on and thinking through things. My parasympathetic nervous system engages when I'm connecting with my kiddo and we're snuggling at night before bed. So those are different ways that we can see that playing out. And they operate along a continuum. And ideally, what we want is to be able to flow between these different states. Again, this is very, very basic and brief overview just for the sake of time today and because I want to get more into the body parts. I do want to mention, though, this piece that has been shared by David and Austin Perlmutter, who wrote, I am blanking on the name, Brainwash. And there's some great work in there that they've done in studying the brain. But here we talk about, again, this is super simplified, and you may know some of this because you work in the realm of ACEs, but this is a key piece on the brain that's really essential for understanding both how being trauma informed needs more than just an academic approach, and how it lives in our bodies. So the amygdala, which is part of the limbic system, is associated with stress and survival as well as pleasure. And the amygdala gets activated during emotional events, and it records memories in the nervous system, either the pleasurable memories or the stress and survival memories. And what's key here is it is essentially the control center for the threat response and for a threat interpretation system. So something goes off and boom, thanks for putting that in the chat, Angie. Boom, the amygdala fires, and it's firing off the alarm bells for the threat response, threat interpretation. When the child care provider was yelling at the child, her amygdala was firing off. It was totally the CEO at the time. The prefrontal cortex, which we all know about because we talk about executive function and the ability to plan and think ahead and look to the future, as well as to weigh alternatives and make decisions, that is part of the cerebral cortex. And what's really key is the relationship between these two. And the relationship between them is what determines our behavior, our capacity to regulate our impulses. And this includes everything from simple cravings to addictions to emotional expression. And I want to just pause and put a plug in here on the idea of addiction, explaining that addiction is not just drug, alcohol, or substance, but that can include sugar, that can include social media, that can include, what we might think of as healthy addictions that are, reading too much or what have you, but all these things that basically train the brain to go into this place of addictive patterns or behaviors. So the key piece that I love sharing about what the Perlmutters do is this piece on the relationship between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala that get damaged. But it's about the relationship between these two. And what they say is it gets damaged due to ACEs and developmental as well as later trauma, and also modern life. And so they talk about chronic stress in the workplace and lifestyle, digital exposure, which includes working the amygdala in both ways. So it could be the likes on Facebook stimulate the pleasure center, and the reading the news and all the horrible news happening in the world stimulates the threat activation response. And so it's both of these things, and it gets worked both ways. These next three are what I talk about as malnutrition. And so I talk about nature malnutrition, where we don't get out in nature enough and we forget that we are part of nature. A poor diet, which is physical malnutrition. And then the lack of connection, which is social malnutrition. And so I bring this in here, one, because they talk about this as an individual health issue as well as a public health issue. And so it explains some of the dysfunction that we see in our world these days, because we know that so many of these 5 modern life pieces are epidemic, but it's also related to the community healing piece, which I'll talk about shortly here. And I bring it into this space because it is one way where we can be really, really clear and really empowered in working on being trauma informed by addressing these lifestyle choices and reducing screen exposure, reducing digital exposure, reducing stress in the workplace, getting out in nature. All of these are around building capacity and expanding or deepening our river. Oops. So here again, just looking at how our nervous systems and our capacity get impaired by modern life, and then add to it a pandemic, lockdown, lack of social connection, racism, so many social justice issues coming to the forefront. And then what we've got is this amygdala functioning as CEO when we really need the prefrontal cortex in the front of the room operating as CEO. And all of this can contribute to disease, to distress, to anxiety, depression, panic attacks, overwhelm, a sense of inner chaos, incapability of making decisions, and of course, being trauma informed in that space is also extremely challenging. So we've been talking about the brain, but it doesn't, in terms of being trauma informed, in terms of having these nervous system responses, but trauma doesn't just live in the brain. The information doesn't just lodge in the brain. So let's talk about healing. And so often, trauma-informed trainings involve engaging our cognitive brain and thinking through, rational thought and what are we going to plan and how are we going to implement this? What are the things that we should be doing? Therapy as well focuses on the brain. Talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. There's a lot of talking. We get insights. The focus is attitudinal and behavioral. But actually being trauma informed has to start somewhere else. When we talk about authentic healing, it needs to happen elsewhere, because healing doesn't just happen in the brain, it happens in the body. And recent studies have shown over and over again that we heal primarily in and through the body, not the rational brain. And we can't just think ourselves into a trauma-informed state when our metaphoric river is running dry because the rocks are too plentiful and piled up and we don't have enough flow capacity or healing online. So trauma is not primarily an emotional or a brain response. Trauma is something that happens in the body. It is a spontaneous protective mechanism that's used by the body to stop or to thwart further or potential damage. And it is a highly, highly effective tool of safety and survival. Our brains are very, very good at this. Peter Levine, who is one of my teachers, and he is the author of Waking the Tiger. He's done lots of work on somatic experiencing and excuse me, and the work of healing the nervous system. And I want to share this quote from him. He says, "Traumatic symptoms are not caused by the triggering event itself. They stem from the frozen residue of energy that has not been resolved and discharged. This residue remains trapped in the nervous system, where it can wreak havoc on our bodies and spirits. The long-term, alarming, debilitating, and often bizarre symptoms of PTSD develop when we cannot complete the process of moving in, through, and out of the immobility or freezing state." So now we're going to talk about how trauma lives in the body. So you may have, I'm going to put this link in for you to take a look at later if you like. You may have seen this video before if you have done nervous system study. Okay. I hope that just went through. But this is there's basically the story, not a story, it's real life, excuse me, story of this impala being chased by a cheetah. They're going 70 miles an hour. The cheetah is in a fast dash to get this impala. The cheetah lunges and the impala goes down. The impala goes into total freeze mode, not breathing, completely still, feels nothing, appears to be dead. But inside, what's happening is the nervous system of the impala has actually shut down and gone into dead stop. But it also has the accelerator on because it's still going 70 miles an hour in the nervous system, as well as going into complete freeze, which is both this animalistic response, which allows it to completely shut down so it doesn't feel pain, and for it to appear to be dead. So in this video, what you'll see is the cheetah kind of lunging is in there. Impala appears to be dead. Cheetah takes off, probably to find other prey. And then you see the impala begin to breathe. And then the impala stands up and then begins to shake involuntarily, like heaving, shaking. And what it's doing is it's discharging all of this trapped energy that it was holding as it went into deep freeze mode with the brake on and the accelerator on at the same time. And then it moves on. So animals have this incredible capacity to do this. And Peter Levine, one of the things he talks about is how we as humans have this incredible freeze response as well. But instead of shaking it off and releasing it after the emergency has passed, we simply tuck it away and keep moving. So we don't discharge it. And what happens is that residual energy stays in the body, and then it can force symptoms out, such as anxiety, depression, panic attacks, psychosomatic and behavioral problems. And it's basically our human organism's way of containing this undischarged residual energy. And that is how trauma lives in the body. So that quote that I just shared is basically a description of this, of how that residual energy gets jammed in the body. And I wanted to, hang on one second, I want to peek at time. Okay, I wanted to share a really quick story of how this played out for me while living in El Salvador, because it, excuse me, it highlights really well how this happens in a not animal way. So I had been, one of the things that I did when I lived there was I led delegations of people from the US who came down to do these reality tours, and then we'd have them stay in the communities and they would do service work and what have you. So we were taking a group out to one of the communities. We were out on the Pan American Highway, and we were basically hijacked by a group of 3 men who held us at gunpoint and then took our vehicle with us in it and drove the opposite way down the Pan American Highway. And so I was the live interpreter at the time. And I used to joke in interviews, circumstances, that this was my best interpreting job ever. And I was, I did all of the instruction giving to our group. I was relaying all the information. I was making sure that they got everything that they wanted, which was all of the valuables on our bus. And I knew at the time, I was really, really clear that nobody was going to get hurt. And I was not calling anyone to not send them home. It wasn't, it never occurred to me that I might get hurt. I was only in protector mode. And so I knew how to keep the situation calm. I knew enough to know these guys were probably ex-combatants or gang members, and I knew not to stir up their nervous systems. I did everything to keep the situation steady. I knew how to get the kids on the, it was a group of teenagers as well as some older people. And I knew how to get everyone to cooperate, and I knew that I was going to get us all alive. So I also knew once we got out and were safe and nobody was hurt and everyone was unharmed, they got away with a lot of stuff, but we were all intact, which is great. I knew how to facilitate the debrief. I knew how to hold space when everybody was like vomiting and crying and shouting and all the things. But what I didn't know how to do was discharge this energy from my own nervous system and take care of myself after. I just kept going. Fast forward a couple of months, and I was hospitalized for a series of infections. My hair was falling out. I had lost tons of weight. I was suffering severe malnutrition, even though I was eating, and my body had just gone into complete shutdown mode, but was giving me all of these different cues physically. And so I just wanted to share that one, though that's an acute trauma, it's one that illustrates well how we go into freeze mode, and then later these symptoms emerge. So trauma does live in the individual body. It also lives in the collective body. And we see this because whether people have directly experienced trauma or not, the stories, the generational frames, the warnings, the knowing, the fear that lives, the witnessing, people live this in their bodies and in the collective experience. We see in the ACEs work how childhood trauma plays out. There's more research being done. How it plays out into health outcomes and life outcomes later in life. And there's more and more research being done on how community and generational trauma as well impact. I think this sign speaks to it really well, and just sums up so much of the experience in the collective body of African Americans in this country. So sometimes trauma can be collective, and most recently this pandemic and the fear that people had of being afraid that they would die, then they're afraid to connect and have this social connection piece, which is so essential for our nervous system healing and our capacity building. Of being afraid to go out in the world. In some ways, people were afraid to go out into nature, and then afraid of what's to come. Structural racism, historical trauma, all of these things impact the bodies of those who experience it. And amazing resource I just want to share. There's many I'll share later, but can't see it. My Grandmother's Hands by Resma Menakem speaks of the trauma that lives in the collective, and speaks of how it lives in the Black body, in the white body, and in the police body. Highly recommend that one. So now let's take a new look at trauma-informed. So fortunately, because we are these beings, human beings with the capacity to feel and respond and reflect, we actually can heal even debilitating traumatic injuries. And as a global humanity, we can also begin to heal from large-scale social traumas. But what this involves is widening and deepening our rivers, both individually and collectively, learning to be with whatever is coming up for us, learning to be with what shows up in the nervous system, in the body, learning not to squelch it, not to shove it down, not to trying to change it or overriding it or shaming it or tucking it away. It allows us to be with our children better, to be with our loved ones better, to be with our families, to be with our coworkers, our clients, or program partners, or colleagues, or participants, or teams, and our communities. And what it does is it also opens up this invitation to others. It gives permission for others to also be trauma informed, or we could call it body informed, for themselves. And so by us as practitioners or change makers or caregivers doing our own trauma informed healing work, what it does is it opens up and creates an environment of safety and security where people can have these very normal human experiences. And all of us have experienced some form of trauma or another. And when we name them and understand them and make space for them to heal, not tucked away, we actually have the power to heal collectively. So I want to go in and do another body practice. So I want to invite you to just settle in and get your feet on the ground and your seat in your chair. We'll just take a couple of minutes to do this. And go ahead and close your eyes and just tune into your breath as you did earlier. And I'd like you to think on a recent stressful event. So not something that's too traumatic, but just something stressful, maybe a hard conversation with a coworker or a partner, or a hard morning with your kiddos, or something you read in the news that just felt really bad to you. And go ahead and remember the event. And then just watch your body as witness. So as if you're sitting outside your body, you're just noticing what's coming up. What is the sensation? Where does it focus? Is there pain or like an electricity or stirring up? Is there a pinching? It could be excitement. It could be fear. And just notice where it shows up in your body. Notice if it moves or if it's still. And you're not judging it. You're simply paying attention. Where does this show up in my body? And when we start tuning in, sometimes what can happen is these bodily impulses that we shove down. So a burp, a cough, laughter, a shudder, a need to pass gas, a desire to cry, or tears themselves. Like sometimes they will just come up because they live in the body and we're giving permission to tune into the response. So if that happens, just let it arise. You're just noticing it without any judgment. And see if you can just allow it. It might be physical, it might be emotional, You might just be noticing what's there. And then acknowledging you're seeing it, you're witnessing it. You can always return to check back in. But for this moment, I want to have you come back to your safe person or animal in that safe space. And just imagine yourself with that person, just leaning in, or with that animal snuggling up. And just being present and noticing the feelings of safety and where the feelings of safety reside. And then the more that you do this, the more you become aware of different areas of the body that contain information or stress, or areas that are holding the trauma or knowing. And of course, there are ways to go, deeper into this work, but this is one way of just touching in and building capacity, building knowing in our systems of how to manage what's there. And go ahead and open your eyes if you haven't already. So I want to say a few things about what trauma-informed is not, in terms of the broader definition that we're talking about it today. And I feel like this is important to mention because when Angie and I first spoke, when she and Claire had asked me to do this webinar, I was chuckling. So I was like, oh, this is delightful. So often people think of trauma-informed as doing this self-regulation deal. There's so much more to it. And so one piece that it is not is forcing self-regulation and just swallowing down the hard stuff. Of course, we have to be professional. Of course, we have to keep strong, and we have to keep it together for our clients or program participants or team members or what have you. And there's a moment where we need to be able to release that energy so it doesn't get frozen in our system. So it's not shoving it down, tucking it away. It's not always helping others first or working without rest, care, restoration, and some level of release. It is not overriding bodily needs, messages, and impulses, which I want to say include everything from needing to pee and honoring that when you need to pee, to you need to cry and honoring that you need to cry, to if there's a shout that needs to come forth and be released, or bigger emotions that need to be released. All of those things are these different ways that we can practice being in our body and honoring what it is that's coming up. So in being trauma informed, I offer this more holistic and inclusive definition. So I would like to say it begins with us doing our own inner healing, our own care, our own self-awareness practices. It involves doing body listening and learning and growing our capacity to know our signals, excuse me, to honor the body, to honor our impulses. It is choosing different lifestyle practices and doing preventive maintenance so we keep our amygdala in check and only available as needed. It includes growing capacity in your own nervous system and increasing the flow, removing the rocks. It includes healing the body. There's many different ways to heal the body. It includes growing our capacity to meet what's in front of us, which I'm realizing I said just above, and to honor that each is unique in their own capacity. We have different abilities to meet what's in front of us, and really honoring that we are different humans with different organisms, and we are different organisms, and different days look different. And then from that place, doing trauma-informed service. And it doesn't mean that everything has to be in place and healed and perfect. But it does mean that we are honoring that we're a work in progress and doing our own healing as we support and help heal others. So I mentioned here a few different trauma-informed practices for our own healing. And then I want to close with just a last couple of messages here. If we think of being individuals with healthy and regulated nervous systems and growing our own capacity, that helps us come to the collective with our healthy regulated systems and growing capacity, which helps the collective then be a more regulated and healthy and capable collective to manage what's in front of us. And from that place, we are able to be trauma informed and create more safety around healing and growing capacity that creates more safety for all of us to lean in. And that is actually what changes the world. So I want to share with you this quote from Resmaa Menakem. A settled body helps other bodies it encounters to settle. Give those bodies the right context and encouragement, and they will begin to harmonize as well. When over time enough bodies heal from trauma and learn to harmonize, that harmony can turn into culture. So I have here just a thank you to many of my teachers. This is not a comprehensive list. And with that, I'm realizing we only have a few minutes, but I would love to, if there's any questions, entertain them. Thank you so much. And if you'd like to know more about my work, please feel free to visit my website, and you have the free exercise there. And if you'd like to be on my newsletter, I share about different tips and tricks, but also events and programs that I'm sharing. So.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I know one of the questions I was having is how can people get into contact with you if they want to be more a part of your work? And are there any programs that you're leading that might be able to be involved in? I know there are some other questions coming in, so could you answer that one as I scan?
Absolutely. Yes, thanks for asking. So one way is to sign up for my newsletter, which you can do at my website, kellylubeck.com. I do have an upcoming event, which is a virtual retreat. I do in-person retreats, but in the last year and a half, I've been doing them virtually. So we have a retreat coming up in about a week and a half on Sunday, September 26th. So you can sign up for that on my website. And I do those in a like a sliding scale to make them accessible. And then I also am offering a program that I call Thrive, which starts in October. And anyone who is here who would like to taste of the work, please come to the retreat. If you would like to go deeper, Thrive is a really great place to join me for doing some deeper healing and healing in community, which is such a beautiful thing. And that will begin October 10th. So yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to cover a couple logistical things before we move on to a couple of logistical questions, actually. So we are offering a certificate of attendance for this presentation, if you would like one. My colleague Simone right now is going to put a link to the survey for this presentation in the chat. And if you answer it, at the bottom, it asks for your email, and we'll send you a certificate of attendance that way. Even if you don't want a certificate of attendance, we would appreciate you answering, because it's always great to get feedback and good quotes about the value of what's happening. And also, there are going to be 2 additional webinars like this, one in October and one in November, leading up to the December 12th through 14th. Is it? No, it's not correct. December 14th through 16th, ACES Summit, which is going to be virtual. And Simone is also going to put the link to how to sign up for those. And the last one in November is actually going to be highlighting an organization that is practicing the trauma-informed approach at different layers of the organization and throughout the organization. And at the bottom of the link that Simone just shared, there is an application if you want your organization to be highlighted, because we are going to pick one out of our applications. We have a few that have come in so far, and that organization will be highlighted. If you want to highlight yours and how you've done this, please do apply. All right, fantastic. Thank you, Simone. She's also put in that survey monkey to apply. So Kelly, one of the questions is, how do you do this effect in which you have a small version of you in the PowerPoint?
There's no other way to do it. I will say that before the Prevent Child Abuse Arizona conference this summer, my previous computer devoured my slides, and I had to redo them and get a new computer. And on this new computer, it's the only way I can do it. So it says it's a beta version. I don't think you have to go buy a new Apple product. It says a beta version, so I'm assuming this will be out soon, but it's honestly, I can't tell you. I'm the least techie person on this call, probably.
So she can't turn it off is the answer. So she's forced to do it this way, but it's really interesting. I think it's kind of cool. That way you don't have to kind of toggle between looking at the slides and looking at the picture. Okay, and there have been a few questions asking if they can get a copy of the PowerPoint. So let's have a conversation about that to see what you would like to offer. This recording is going to be available on the Arizona Adverse Childhood Experiences page. So you can rewatch it again. I know I learned a lot. It's wonderful and also hard to hear that it is really about the body, because there are so many things in our systems that lead to the denial of that really kind of push us from our body or lead us to disconnect. I know that sometimes I kind of realize I have to pee long after I definitely have had to, or like I'm hungry, but now I'm ravenous. Listening to body cues, I think, can be hard. So thank you, Kelly, for that wisdom. It's about our bodies, our human being bodies.
Our human being bodies. And I do want to say, just because I wasn't able to see all of the chat, but I did see a couple of things pop up about not feeling so great after. And I just want to name that sometimes when we go in and we tune in and we have not been, that's part of why I mentioned at the beginning, sometimes things will show up. Sometimes it feels amazing to go in and it's like, whoa, it's like peace and love in here. And sometimes it feels really stirred up and ugly, or you notice pain. So what I want to encourage you to do is not shove the pain down and not run away from it, but give yourself the space to talk through it and find a loved one, someone who can be a good listener or witness, or a professional or someone that you can reach out to, because these things are real and they live in the body. There's so much good information out there about this work. But if anything you take away is, please don't shove it down and also just honor what it is that's showing up. I know sometimes it's so hard. And I also want to say that it's a journey, right? We are on this journey. And even as a teacher of this and someone who, this is my life passion. I mean, my kid is too, but it's my life passion to share this and fold this into the work of change making and caregiving. And I still have to come back into these practices all the time. I am not immune. I have not fixed everything. It is something that we all need to come back to. And my capacity is pretty wide. Like I have a pretty wide and deep river, and I still have to do my daily practices to stay in a really well-regulated place. And sometimes it gets ugly when I go in, and I work with that. So I just want to name that and normalize it, because it is part of the healing journey. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. That makes it more accessible, that it's just like a thing that you magically can do all at once.
Yeah.
Perfectly.
Totally.
All right.
And there's not a magical cure all that it's all done.
Yeah, check. I wish. That's not the case. Okay. Well, thank you. And thank you for staying on a few more minutes after one. Thank you to everyone who's attended this webinar to access this information, for being present with it. And we hope to see you at next month's webinar. And thank you so much again, Kelly, for your presentation and for sharing your wisdom. Everyone have a great rest of your day. Okay. Bye, everyone.